We're starting to see a lot of the weird hot takes come out of the cracks in the Star Fox community, like a bunch of locusts or cockroaches or something. Like a lot of the insects in the community are just rushing out, trying desperately to tank the new Star Fox game. You know, like the Direct got like what 4.5 million views already. This is a game that's probably, I think, gonna outsell Star Fox 64, becoming the best-selling game in the series, and kind of reestablishing Star Fox as an iconic Nintendo brand. And a lot of people are seething about that. Okay, like if Star Fox can come back into vogue like 30 years later, you know, this is going to set a precedent where a lot of Nintendo games are just going to be seen as these things that can like perpetually come back at any time. You know, the notion that people have that like we're never going to get another F-Zero or Star Fox or Metroid game, it's just not going to be a thing anymore, especially when you compare it to the current state of like Final Fantasy VII or like you know, Metal Gear Solid or like Spyro or like any of these other like PlayStation exclusive franchises, Sly Cooper, right? You just have like dozens of examples of things that just aren't doing as well as these like Nintendo brands that are nowhere near as iconic, and yet we're consistently told that they're way more popular and successful. Like what we're seeing with Star Fox is that like after Zero, after the Wii U, after like all of the bullshit we've gone through in the past 25 years with like the entire industry rallying to destroy this brand, this is the end result of that, in that Star Fox is coming back, you know, remaking 64 for a new audience, and it's going to have a new generation of fans. You know, all the nonsense people had about like not wanting another rail shooter or not wanting another 64, all of that's just completely imploded now, and there's not really a whole lot they can do. So, in a desperate attempt at like trying to create controversy around the franchise, you're seeing a lot of people like come up with really weird hyperbolic bullshit. You know, you've seen people glaze Star Fox Assault. You've seen people, you know, start to glaze Star Fox Zero. You're seeing people like, you know, freak out about Crackhead Cat, which I kind of do agree. Like, Cat's redesign is fucking garbage. But like, by and large, most people are just like super like supportive of like what the franchise is becoming and like where the direction of it. Like you can't even really complain about this being a remake, because I think the overwhelming consensus for this release is that like obviously they're gearing up for like a new release, because I'm sure that like, you know, they have a new team working on this, and they're going to continue producing like new Star Fox games in the future. So all of this is well and good, but there has been like one major cope that I have seen people like come up with and address, and really does need to be talked about. Like, what exactly, like this is like the biggest amazing cope I've ever seen in my life. And this has been like going on for decades. You know, I've seen like, you know, Larry Bundy Jr. make videos about this. I saw people trying to make this a thing when Star Fox Zero was coming out. Okay, there is a certain like subculture in the Star Fox community that glazes Argonaut games and sees them as the real innovators when it comes to Star Fox and the real creators of the franchise, and that Nintendo just stole the IP they created for Star Fox 64. So first of all, like this entire mindset like hinges on this idea that like Argonaut developed Star Fox by themselves, which is like obviously not true. It was always a Nintendo-owned IP. Like Nintendo had them do the 3D visuals, and like Argonaut like programmed it. But like, you know, by the time Star Fox 2 was being developed, like all the key people like moved over to Nintendo. They developed the game. It was canceled, and then Nintendo developed Star Fox 64 in-house, which of course is the best game in the series. So what's been happening over the past like 30 years is that there's been this weird like attempt at historical revisionism like pushed forward by Argonaut Games themselves. Like the idea that Nintendo like set them up to fail, that Nintendo stole their work, that they stole their programmers, that they stole their game, right? That they stole their idea for like a 3D Yoshi game and reused it for like Mario 64, right? Like Argonaut was like a major Nintendo partner in like the early days of Star Fox, but much like Rareware, you know, they got too big for their britches. They thought that they would be able to push Nintendo around, that they would always like, you know, be involved in the product. But now, as we've seen, Star Fox has grown and evolved way past them. And we're at the point now where I think even like hardcore fans aren't too familiar with the original Star Fox or Star Fox 2. Like the simple fact of the matter is 64 is the most iconic Star Fox game for a reason. Like if you're talking about Star Fox, you're basically talking about 64. Like, you know, 1 and 2 are just like, you know, kind of relics and haven't really aged well. Like I just beat like a path on Star Fox on Super Nintendo, and it's kind of shocking just how it's not that good compared to like other Super Nintendo games at the time. Like really the only really interesting thing about it is like the visuals, which were really cutting edge at the time, but truthfully they really haven't aged well at all. Like even by 97 they looked unbelievably dated, and like 64 in comparison was just aged better. It had like, you know, better mechanics, you know, it had the root system, it had like, you know, true endings. Like the idea that anybody would prefer like the original over 64 is laughable. And honestly, the only people I see doing that are like hipster contrarians who like really suck at 64. You know, people like Razor Fist, okay? Like, oh man, the original is way better. Oh, but I haven't played 64 since 2011. Oh, like, it's like, oh, where are all the switches for the train? Oh, like again, the people who like shit talk 64 are just hipster contrarians who really have no idea what they're talking about. Because 64 is better than Star Fox 1 and 2 in like every way. And, you know, Zero like improved on that. Like again, this is like this is the interesting fact of the matter is that, like, you know, as controversial as Adventures, Assault, Command, and Zero are, they are infinitely more beloved and recognizable than the first two games, especially the second, which didn't even fucking come out. So like when you take into consideration like where the franchise is right now. You know, when you take into consideration, like, you know, how Nintendo, like, developed it and how they grew and evolved it and how they experimented with it, like, the simple fact of the matter is that Argonaut simply was not, like, all that competitive. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, Argonaut is a company that was, like, contracted to do, like, a very specific thing for Nintendo, you know, make 3D models on a Super Nintendo, and like they were never able to like grow outside that niche. And very quickly after that, they faded into irrelevancy. Like, what Argonaut game have you played recently? Okay, like they tried like re-releasing, you know, Croc on the eShop. Like nobody gave a shit. You know, no matter how many people tried to tell you that like Argonaut, you know, Croc was secretly just as popular as Banjo-Kazooie, that just was not and never was not and never has been true, right? You know, no matter how many people try and tell you that, like, Argonaut, you know, no matter how many times Argonaut tweets about how they totally created Star Fox, like, nobody fucking cares. Because the simple fact of the matter is, Nintendo owned the IP, they have always owned the IP, they came up with the initial idea for the characters, for the style, for the presentation. You know, Miyamoto was very specific about, like, the style and the direction of the series. And, yeah, the idea that, like, Argonaut was secretly responsible for everything that, like, made the series what it is completely laughable. Especially because they had no involvement with 2 or 64 at all. like the simple fact of the matter is, the series has like evolved way past Argonaut's involvement, right? Their involvement with Nintendo's development essentially just amounted to developing the Super FX chip, and that's it. Like, obviously they have their place in history, and obviously They were a major player in like early 3D visuals, which would be perfected and improved by the N64 era. But like the idea that they secretly created Star Fox and that they had the right to like maintain ownership of the franchise is just not true. Like that's just very clearly observable by simply like doing the simplest amount of research. Like not even the people who at Argonaut who programmed Star Fox thought that, because of course they all left to work directly for Nintendo for Star Fox 2 and then left to form their own companies after that. So like that's just the reality of the situation, is that like anybody who tries to say that Argonaut was like secretly the true creators of Star Fox just don't know what they're talking about. That's just very, very, very apparent if you like know anything about the franchise and its history. But like the reason why this is such a heavily pushed thing, the same way that like Miyamoto secretly hating Rareware is such a like a prominent thing. Like the reason why people try and invent these stories is to try and make Nintendo look incompetent and stupid, and to try and make it look like they backstab their partners for no reason. When in actuality, it's entirely because these partners have like unrealistic expectations. They get angry at Nintendo for like wanting them to produce results. Like you constantly see like people at Western companies leaving if they have to work on Nintendo products. These people just get uppity about certain things. Like they don't like the expectation that they're working for Nintendo. Like they're working on a Nintendo brand. And it's just so unbelievably like embarrassing that even 30 years later, like Argonaut's trying to get people to pay attention to them. Like, hey, we worked on the original Star Fox. Like we made the character. Like the original Star Fox is so far removed from where the brand is now that like it's not even like recognizable. Okay? Like not a single person gave a shit about Argonaut Games tweeting about Star Fox like after the movie came out. Like I think maybe they got like a couple of hundred likes. I might have to like look that up. I saw them like tweet it out 3 different times. Like, oh, please pay attention to us. We made Star Fox. Like nobody fucking cares. Like you're just like Rareware at this. Actually, you're worse than Rareware, because at least people go back and play old Rareware games. And at least Rareware had a string of huge hits through the 90s. Like Argonaut didn't produce shit after the original Star Fox. Again, Argonaut was only relevant because of this idea that because of the cutting edge visuals of the Super FX shit. Like without that, they're not particularly good game devs. They've never gone on to do anything of value. Like Star Fox 2 isn't interesting. Command is the worst in the series, and that was headlined by a lot of former Argonaut people. So again, the difference in quality between mainline Japanese developed Star Fox, the actual root of the franchise, versus degenerate, lazy, stupid Western partners, it's very striking. It's very striking indeed. But as we go further along in these game development histories, as we go into the 90s and especially the 2000s, a lot of this stuff is more easily documented, and a lot of assumptions that people invented back in the day to downplay certain properties, they're more easily debunked, because I talked a lot about how Ultima and Wizardry and the Tower of Draga did not actually influence The Legend of Zelda in any way, shape, or form. But the narrative back in the day among PC gamers was that Zelda was secretly influenced by all those things, and it's it plays nothing like them. It's nothing like those things at all. And you kind of see the same thing with Star Fox. I've seen people say that Star Fox is secretly just a casualized wing commander. You see people talking about how it's a lesser brand, and now you're trying to see people try and say that it was secretly a Western product all along, when that's very observably not true. All of this is just a method of downplaying Nintendo games, and every decade it feels like it's getting harder and harder to lie about the products like this. You know, like, again, Breath of the Wild, it's interesting. Breath of the Wild was influenced by Skyrim. Like, nobody denies that. Like, the developers come out and say it. But, like, Breath of the Wild was able to innovate and do things fresh, new, and exciting. Okay? Like, the difference between, like, Breath of the Wild's approach and Skyrim's approach is very distinct, okay? Outside of both being, like, open, they're not really that similar at all. And I think that's kind of my mentality on it. That even if, like, a Nintendo game takes influence from something else, it's like its own distinct thing. It's its own distinct thing, which means that gamers just, like, trying to say that, like, well, secretly this Western game did this, like, a year before. Like, nobody cares. Like, nobody fucking cares. The reason why everybody remembers the Nintendo game is because it's better. Like, nobody's playing Tower of Draga today, and The Legend of Zelda is still considered one of the greatest games of all time. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, the narrative that, like, Nintendo is, like, some uninspired company that can't, like, do anything and make good games, it's just not true. It never has been. And all of these excuses that people come up with, like, whether it's, like, pretending some other company developed the game, or, like, pretending that, like, someone else did it first, or pretending that, like, you know, PlayStation was better, like, no matter what it is, no matter what the excuse is, like, it doesn't deny reality that, like, to this day, Star Fox 64 is a beloved classic. And it will continue to be one for years to come. Like, there's just no disputing this fact that Star Fox 64 is just an all-time classic of the genre and will be played and enjoyed by gamers for generations.